Good evening. My name's Neil Bubke, and I'm the Director of Music and Fine Arts at the United Methodist Church of Whitefish Bay. Thanks for joining us tonight for our tour of the Chance pipe organ. We'll be led in this tour by our principal organist, David Hein. Welcome, David.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
We've had you in our midst at the church for a number of years now. Can you tell us how you came to be the principal organist here?
Well, actually, the story kind of goes back to a friend of mine who is a member of this parish who sent me a message and said, our church is looking for a new organist, and since you're an organist, you probably know more organists than I do. Can I send you the job description? And she did, and I said to myself, I know an organist who's interested in this job description, and so that's how I applied for the position here already almost 4 years ago.
Is it 4 years ago?
Yeah.
Well, we're very lucky to have you, and we're excited to learn just a little bit more about this instrument. We hear it on Sunday mornings. We see this part of the organ, but could you just explain to me what the organ actually is? It's a lot more than meets the eye.
Right. So we commonly will point in the direction of this piece of furniture and say this is the organ, when in fact really what this is really the control center for the organ. It's referred to as the console, and it's a series of keyboards and all of the controls that affect the actual organ, and the organ itself is back behind that screen. That's where all the pipes are.
Okay, so Mr. Tim, can we cut to my camera now? So David, we're going to use my cell phone as a camera. This is a first try at this sort of thing, so if we hear from Mr. Tim, we might just cut back to the regular camera. But for now, I want to use this to zoom in so that people at home can see just how much is going on this console.
Right, and so what you are seeing are all of the control knobs that activate the various pipes that are in the pipe case. In a little while we'll go back and look at those pipes, but there are names that are written on the end of each of these control knobs, and they pull out, they pull on or push off. You might have heard the term stop before, it's an organ stop. That actually dates to the earliest years of the organ, when the default position for all the stops was on, and in order to silence it, you would push them to stop the sound. That's where the name organ stop comes from.
Okay. So pulling out all the stops literally does mean
yes, it
pulling
really does.
out all of these buttons.
Yeah, so that expression that we use in the English language is referring to putting everything you have behind a particular cause. We say we're pulling out the stops. And on an organ, if you pull out all the stops, it's the absolute loudest that the organ can be. So that's typically a very exciting sound, and so that's where that expression came from.
Just out of curiosity, what is the loudest sound our instrument can make?
Well, if we pull everything off at once, that would be something in the vicinity of this.
Nice.
If I worked, I might be able to find a few more things to turn on, but that's just about everything.
So I've got a question. As I look at these stops, there's two different types of information on each one. And the first looks like some foreign words.
Yes,
sometimes
and so
it's in English.
Right, so what you're seeing, first of all, the name of the stop is usually connected to the historic tradition that the organ comes from. So organs have descended in their developmental line from particular schools of building, and they date back to to sort of the European continent. So we have a German tradition of organ building, a French tradition. Those are the two primary. There's an English tradition of organ building as well. And so these names that you see in the end of the stops are words that most of the ones on this instrument are German. Holzgedeckt is a type of a flute. A Koppelflute is a type of a flute. Rohrnasat is also a type of a flute. Spitzflute, Bourdon, that would be coming from French. So this instrument kind of mixes those things together, and that's actually that's also characteristic of a category of instruments that has grown up on the North American continent. We call them the American classic instruments, and that's what this is, a good example of an American classic.
Okay, so come back to the, we're gonna go back to the camera at the back of the sanctuary. So David, we just saw a lot of the stops. You explained very nicely what the words mean and what they represent. What are the numbers on the stops?
Right. So the organ is not capable of getting louder or softer in the same way that we think of the human voice being able to crescendo, or, for example, a wind instrument player can add more air and energy to their playing to make the sound grow larger. In the organ, we can only turn sounds on or turn sounds off. And so in order to get the sense that the sound is growing larger, we do that by layering the sounds. We add one level of sound, we then add more sounds on top, and we layer the sounds together. And all of the sounds in the organ are based around the harmonic series, the overtone series, where we have the fundamental tone that we hear is the foundation, and that's referred to by a measurement, and that's what all these numbers are.
Okay, so if we can switch back to my phone, for example then, if we were to pull the 8-foot stop.
Let's go over to this side here.
Okay.
So if we were to pull this 8-foot stop here, this is kind of the foundational stop of the instrument, and it's referred to as the principal.
Okay.
And so when we hear that, it sounds like this. And if you have some music in your background, I started on middle C and went up 1 octave.
Okay.
And so that 8 is referring to the length of the longest pipe in that stop. So when we have 1 pipe per key, we call that a rank. And so there are 54 notes here in the entire keyboard, and this note right down here would be 8 feet long. When we go back in the pipe case, we'll see that the longest pipe in every rank is 8 feet long. And so we cut the pipe gets cut in half for every octave that you move. So that C is 8 feet, that C is 4 feet, that C is 2 feet, 1 foot, 6 inches, 3 inches.
Very nice. Well, I tell you what, let's take a break from the technical aspects of the instrument and hear you play an excerpt of
Sure.
something that you'd like to show us.
Sure. So what I'd like to show you is, and one of the ways that, hold on, I got to find it. There it is. One thing that the organ is characteristic of is the fact that we have pedals, a pedal keyboard down here. And so what I'm going to do is play an excerpt of a chorale prelude that puts the melody of the chorale in the feet. And so you might know this chorale. This is Praise to the Lord the Almighty. This tune sounds like. So that's the melody that this particular chorale prelude is based around, and you're going to see that melody line being done by my feet here. So let me get it set up for us.
All right. While you're doing that, I'm going to reposition so I can get a nice shot of your pedal work.
And I'm going to put a trumpet in my feet as well, which will make the melody stand out just a little bit more. So this is about just short of 2 minutes long, I think.
Okay. David, who's the arranger of that?
So that is a composition of Johann Gottfried Walther, who would be a precursor to Johann Sebastian Bach. He's composing in the Baroque.
So I notice at first glance that it almost appears like there are 3 different piano keyboards. I guess they're not piano keyboards. Tell me about how you classify these.
Right. So historically, the organ was actually a portable instrument. It was something that could be carried around, actually, and so it would only have had enough pipes to perhaps play a scale. Think about pipes that would be about the same length as maybe a recorder, somewhere between a recorder and an alto recorder, maybe up to a tenor recorder size. And if you think about the way bagpipes operate, you would blow the bellows under your arm on a bagpipes. The air source for an original organ was considered, or would have been done in that same way. Once the organ stopped being portable, people started, the building tradition started to add additional entire families of pipes. And the pipes would be organized into particular cases. So you'd have one case that would be full of pipes of a certain characteristic, and another case that would be full of pipes of different characteristic. And they were meant to be discrete organs capable of sounding full and complete by themselves. But could be used also in concert together. And so each of these 3 keyboards is connected to those particular cases of pipes. And the original keyboard would be referred to as the grate. The top keyboard would be referred to as the swell, and the bottom keyboard in this instrument is referred to as a choir. In some instruments, it's referred to as the positif. And I'm wondering if this might be the right time for us to actually go back in the case to look at the construction of the instrument itself. We'll see some of the pipes, and we'll see what the case actually looks like. And then when we come back out here again, I'll show you how those sounds can be layered together to achieve what you just heard me play.
All right, let's go back and take a look.
So before we go back and look at the pipes in the pipe case, let's just remind ourselves one more time that the 3 manuals and the pedal keyboard that are here in front of us all are connected to a particular set of pipes that we'll go look at in a moment. The top keyboard we refer to as the swell, and that's connected to pipes in the swell portion of the pipe case. This is referred to as the grate, the middle pipes, middle section, and then the choir pipes that are going to be on the far south end of the sanctuary here, plus the pedal pipes that are down below. So let's go look at the pipe case.
All right.
Come on, May.
I think Mamo is probably going to have to stay in the sanctuary. She's not very good with ladders. One of the reasons we do have the pipe chamber accessible only by ladder is for safety. Because as you can imagine, it could be very expensive if someone were to tamper with what lies inside.
And it also controls it for temperature reasons, so when we have the door shut, it helps keep the pressure, the humidity, and the temperature constant, because that's the number one enemy of any pipe organ, is a variety of atmospheric conditions which change the shape and the tuning of the instrument. So the first portion of the instrument that we see once we enter the pipe case is the swell portion. So that's that top keyboard that I was pointing to. And this portion of the pipe case is actually completely sealed off from the rest of the pipe case. And that is where we get the name swell from, because in a moment, once we bring the camera further in, you'll be able to see out towards the sanctuary that there are a series of louvered shades. You can see them from inside the instrument. You can't see them from the sanctuary because there's a black screen in place to prevent you from seeing it. But those louvered shades are controlled by the pedals underneath by the organist's feet. And you can vary the degree to which they are open or shut. And the idea that the sound grows louder is where the name swell comes from. And you can see Neil is adjusting the swell shades. So when they are shut all the way, it gives the sense that the sound is more contained because you can't hear it as well. And when they're open, that's the fullest volume that's possible. So it's a precursor or an early way that organ construction created the sense of crescendo when pipes by themselves are not capable of growing louder or softer. You can only have more pipes or less pipes, fewer pipes or more pipes sounding at any given time. So it's tight quarters here, but I think this makes for a good place to be able to see real clearly how the pipes are situated on the pipe case.
So David, I'm already noticing that there are some wooden pipes and some metal pipes here in the swell chamber. Can you tell me how many different types of pipes are there in our organ?
So most organs are comprised of 3 major types of pipe sound. The one category would be called a flue pipe or a foundation pipe, and those are like you see right here. They are basically open cylindrical tubes, and the wind passes by an opening that's called the mouth of the pipe, and there's a lip is this curved part, and that curved part can be adjusted. It's almost like, think about opening a sardine can. It twists downwards, and the amount of space that is there, as well as the shape that the pipe has been hammered into, affects the tone quality. So this is the first type of pipe. It's a flue pipe. It's open and provides the main characteristic sound of an organ referred to as a foundation.
So the shape of that mouth has an impact on the timbre of the sound, just like with singing?
It does, it's true. So depending on how that opening is shaped, that affects the tone quality, as does too the scale. And scale refers to how big around a pipe is. So the bigger around a pipe is, the more kind of warm toned it will be, and the smaller around the pipe is, the more that it will have more of a sort of penetrating quality to it.
So with this type of pipe, you called it a foundational. The tuning, how does that work?
So at the very top there, you can see perhaps there's looks like a cap or a piece that can slide up and down. That is literally referred to as the sleeve, and the sleeve moves up and down, and that's how the pipe is tuned. So the longer that a pipe is, the lower that its pitch is, and the shorter that a pipe is, the higher its pitch is.
So the pipe behind you seems to have an extra feature. What type of pipe is this?
Right, so this is the second category of pipes, and it's referred to as reeds. And contained inside of this pipe is I'm not going to pull the pipe apart because that actually will affect the tuning of it, and I don't want to have to retune this particular pipe. So the reed, if you think about the way that a reed is positioned on, for example, the end of a clarinet, and then that reed gets put into the player's mouth, and they blow air across the reed, and then the reed vibrates. The same thing is going on inside of these pipes. There's a reed in there so that when the air travels up through the pipe, it moves across the reed and vibrates back and forth. Well, the reason why that's of interest is that it produces a tone quality that emulates other instruments. So depending on the size of the pipe, the shape of the pipe, and the size of the reed, you could end up with a sound that's kind of gentle, like an oboe or a clarinet, and we've got one of those on this organ that I will show you. And the opposite is true. If you've got a larger sounding pipe and a larger reed, it produces a stronger sound, which is much more characteristic of, say, a trumpet. And we have that sound on our instrument as well. So reed pipes make the second category of pipes.
Let's go around the corner and find that third category of pipes.
All right, so now we're going to climb up here to look at what is the third category of sound. It would be incorrect to say the third category of pipe, because the third category of sound is actually produced by more than one pipe. And if you remember earlier, we talked about the ability to layer sound based on the length of the pipe. So the 8-foot speaking range with the 4-foot speaking range with the 2-foot speaking range. The sort of the crown to the organ sound is referred to as a mixture pipe, and as the name implies, it's produced by a mixture of sound. So the harmonic series is what comprises the mixture pipes. They are very small. They're emphasizing the sound that occurs an octave and a third, or an octave and a fifth above the fundamental speaking tone. And so they would be the smallest possible pipes that you would see. And when I would depress a key, more than one of those would sound at the same time.
So it's hard to notice without a point of reference, but some of these pipes that David is describing are actually smaller in circumference than a pen or pencil. So indeed, they are tiny.
And it's also really easy here to see a different type of flue pipe that's called a stopped pipe. And that means that the top of the pipe is capped off instead of open like this. And so while it is just a hollow cylinder, it also the tone has been affected by the fact that there's a stopped pipe. And so the kind of tone that pipe produces varies from this type of pipe by having the harmonic series that the pipe is sounds different. So while we're up this high in the case, it actually makes for a good vantage point to see the pedal pipes. They require more space because they are longer, because they are lower. They produce lower pitch, and lower pitched pipes have to be longer. And they will sound a full octave lower than the human voice, than speaking pitch. So if you think about middle C on a keyboard, a pedal pipe will, when you depress middle C, you would hear the tone sound an octave or sometimes 2 octaves lower than that. And so in this case in front of us, these pipes that are right in the front would be the upper end of the pedal, of some of the pedal pipes, and the ones behind it, which stretch up that high, are the lowest of the pedal sounds. They're principal foundation pipes, and that one right there would be 16 feet long. It's got a 16-foot sounding pitch. So it means it sounds 1 octave lower than middle C. So far on our tour, we started in the swell when we first went up the ladder outside the instrument, and then we've climbed up this ladder into the grate, which is pipes that are controlled by that middle keyboard. While we're here, we can actually look below and see the bellows that are producing the wind that fuel the pipes. So when the instrument is turned on, wind is being forced through those pipes right there into this wooden box, which then inflates and moves upwards. This is a accordion fold membrane that will separate, and when enough air pressure is pushed into the bellows, then this spring retracts and hangs and makes the pressure stable, so that no matter how many keys are depressed and no matter how many pipes are sounding, the amount of wind that is being pushed through all the pipes remains consistent pressure. Otherwise that would affect the tuning if that were not true. So now let's move from the grate portion of the organ, the pipes that are controlled by the middle keyboard, to the choir portion of the organ, which is through this door over here. Let's go. So the first thing, besides this ladder, the first thing that you see when you come in here are a different category of pipes that we've not quite seen look quite like this. And this is these are wooden pipes. So I described there being 3 categories of pipes. Foundations or flues were the first, the second was the reeds, and the third was the class of sound we called mixtures. The first category of pipes is actually broken into several categories itself, and one of those is metal flue pipes and the other is wooden flue pipes. So if you think about the kind of sound that you hear from instruments that are made of those same types of materials, a flute made out of metal compared to a recorder made out of wood gives you some sort of an analog to think about in terms of the type of character of sound that is produced by the different pipes. These are referred to as wooden flue pipes. So the last thing I'm going to show you, tucked way off here in the corner of the choir, is kind of a novelty device, I guess you could say, but they're part of larger size organs quite commonly, and it's a series of bells that are mounted, that are arranged with a spinning clapper that when it's turned on, this will just spin freely and ring those bells. And they aren't, I mean, while they do have pitch, it's true, they also are meant to be kind of a sparkle that doesn't necessarily produce a particular tone. And often it's referred to as the Zimbelstern. And the Zimbelstern is often used when the organ is set to play quite loudly. You have lots of pipes playing at the same time, and it's kind of like the crowning glory on the top of the sound, that once all of the sound is full and rich and brilliant sounding, then this sound just gets added to the top, and you can just perceive very faintly the sparkling bell sound on top of the full sound of the organ.
I could imagine you using that during the final stanza of Joy to the World.
Yep, that's precisely when it gets used. You use it on the final stanza of hymns, or especially hymns from festival days, so Easter and Christmas. So the final thing that we'll look at while we're here in the organ case is related to the electronic module that sits on top of the console out in the sanctuary. Some instruments, some organs produce tone electronically by synthesizing a sound that sounds like a pipe, and some organs like this do it through wind. We have a combination of the two, and so that module allows us to add some extra sounds that are actually electronically generated, and it's referred to as a synthesis module or a sound module. It is connected up to an amplifier here, which is then connected up to large speakers, and so when that module is activated from the organ, you're actually hearing sound come through these loud speakers.
So believe it or not, part of the pipe organ actually lives in Fellowship Hall. Show us what I mean, David.
Here we go, up the steps. So it's kind of loud in here. When we get inside, you're going to see a bellows that are similar to the one that we saw underneath the grate, though it's bigger.
And what is the function of this bellow?
So the bellows that I showed you upstairs are producing wind that's used on the grate keyboard and the swell and the choir keyboards. This bellows is producing wind for the pedal pipes. The pedal pipes, being so much bigger around and longer, require more air and more air pressure to get the wind to get enough air into the pipe to produce the vibrations for that sound. So the reason why these are down here is that they're larger and they require more air. Plus, you can hear how loud they are. So by putting them in the basement, that keeps the volume of this bellows not a problem to interrupting the sound of the organ.
All right, so now let's go to the balcony. So I'm a little winded, but we made it up to the balcony. What are we doing up here, David?
Well, there is one more part of the organ that it would not surprise me that some people might not even know exists because it's so quiet. And it's actually referred to as the echo organ, and it's in a small case that's up on the south side of the balcony, over this direction.
All right. And what's the point of having an echo chamber?
It's really a sonic effect or a sound effect. It lets you put sound in another part of the room, so the organist can literally play in two different sides of the room and control it all from one manual. Those pipes are all inside of this case right here. There are two categories of pipes that are in the echo organ, flue pipes, and also there is one reed stop. It's a very small, delicate sounding oboe that's right here at the front of the case. And when all of these pipes, even when all of these pipes are sounding at the same time, it still doesn't produce that much sound. So let's, all right, so I think let's listen to some of the sounds that we were pointing out back there. And I think the key thing to start with would be when we climbed up way high. You saw me climb up the ladder, and we looked down onto the tiny pipes that were part of the mixture. Let me show you that layering effect that I had described before we went into the pipe case, and how that functions. And so when I pull out the principal 8-foot stop, this sounds like. And then part of the principle of good registration, that's the act of drawing certain stops to produce a blend of sounds. The next stop that would be part of that family would be considered the 4-foot octave. So this is a direct relative of this pipe. It's a different rank of pipes, but when I pull it out, it's exactly an octave higher, and I'll show you what I mean. So here is the first 8-foot. Now here is the 4-foot, and notice that my hand is in the exact same position, but it's going to sound like an octave higher. And I'll keep my hand in exactly the same position, and now I'll pull out the 2-foot, and it goes up another octave. And so the effect is when we add those, we can hear now, if I put on 2 draw knobs, now when I play every key, there will be 2 pipes sounding at the same time, one at the 8-foot pitch range and one at the 4-foot pitch range. So let's add in a third. Now we hear 3 pipes per key. And what you hear is that the sound starts to grow in intensity and fullness because of that layering effect that's going on. And so the last thing that I would pull on would be that mixture stop, which, remember, I talked about that as being a separate category of stop. It's actually more than one rank, and that's where this number here is the clue all of these numbers up to this point have been Arabic numerals, whereas this now is a Roman numeral, and the Arabic numerals are all ranks that contain one pipe per key. The Roman numerals are stops that contain more than one pipe per key, and this is Roman numeral 4, so there are actually 4 pipes that are sounding with every key, and they're quite high, emphasizing the top part of the harmonic series. Listen. They're not meant to sound by themselves. They're meant to sound in concert with the other stops. So they're meant to be used with the 8, the 4, and the 2. You build your sound upwards, and then this serves as the crown of the sound. Mixtures are often what we think of as being sort of the characteristic sound of the organ. Think toccata and fugue in D minor. That characteristic sound of the organ is produced by the mixture. That same thing without the mixture turned on would sound like. With the mixture. I
So
hope,
I'm not sure if people at home can hear the difference.
Yeah, I'm hoping that the sound quality on your headphones or on your computer speakers are good enough that you can kind of pick that up.
Here in the sanctuary, you can definitely hear the added texture and depth of sound when you add the mixture. I tell you what, let's hear you play another one of your favorite pieces.
Sure, and so I'm going to play another choral prelude that puts the melody in the feet. This one is based on the hymn, Holy God, We Praise Your Name, which you might recognize. I had it open. This is the hymn that it's based on. So we are going to hear the composer Flor Peters, his chorale prelude based on that hymn tune, which is called Grosser Gott, or Holy God, We Praise Your Name. And once again, I'm going to make the pedal stand out by having some reed pipes. Here's what those sound like. Here's a trumpet on the feet. Here is a trombone on the feet. So we'll layer all that together to get a fairly big sound. All right, so this is a style of piece that's referred to as toccata. And toccata is a word that is connected to the term touch piece. And it's continuous motion in the manuals with the slow notes playing the melody line in the feet. And so I don't know if you want to watch the music or watch me. I don't care.
Thanks, David. That's a very exciting piece. I think now would be a great time to answer some questions. There should be a phone number appearing on the screen, and if anybody has some questions that they'd like to ask of David, we encourage you to go ahead and text those to me right now. While we're waiting for those questions to come in, I'm just wondering, who are some of your favorite organ composers?
Well, gosh, I find that my favorites kind of change in a cyclical sort of way. So I will go from, at one point I'll be liking the music of J.S. Bach, or maybe some of the choral preludes of Johannes Brahms. But then I'll find that I like 20th century composers, like we heard Flora Peters just now. I'm going to hopefully later, if we have time yet, play one more piece for us at the end of our time. That's a British composer by the name of Nigel Ogden. And he writes kind of in a theatrical style. I think it's fun.
We've got a question here from an anonymous person. They are wondering how it is that you and I both became interested in playing the organ.
Well, do you want to go first, or do you want me?
Sure. My answer's easy. I grew up in a small town in northwest Iowa, and Mrs. Karstens was our church organist, and she was about 89, and she got to the point where it was really difficult for her to play the instrument, and I was the only kid in the church who played piano, and so I thought, geez, it would be nice if I could help out, and so I was self-taught in high school, and then at the University of Northern Iowa, I took 1 year of organ lessons with Dr. Mary Lou Kratchenstein, who was a famous researcher of Mexican organ literature. And to be honest, in the interest of self-disclosure, I would call myself, with that limited education, a survival organist. What about you, David?
In some ways, my story is not too terribly different. I did not actually start as a youngster thinking that I was going to play the organ. I was a piano player, singer. I wasn't really even convinced I was going to be a music major when I went to college until I finally had to choose a major and realized I really couldn't do anything else. And so music was going to be it. And when I got to college, the organ professor who was there was so enormously inspiring that I thought no matter what I choose to do with my musical career, I would be foolish not to take advantage of the fact that this person is here teaching organ. His name is John Ferguson at St. Olaf College, and so I began taking organ lessons late as far as many organists go. Most organists already are starting by the time their feet are long enough, by the time they've grown tall enough that their feet can touch the pedals. And so I didn't really start playing organ until I was a sophomore in college, and then had the opportunity to study further when I moved to Arizona after I graduated from undergraduate, and I studied for a little while with Robert Clark, and had the chance to study Baroque performance practice techniques on a magnificent Fritz organ at Arizona State University in Tempe.
John Ferguson, as some of you know, is the composer of several anthems that the chancel choir sings on a somewhat regular basis. So that's an interesting tie-in that you actually got to study with him. We've got an interesting question here from Ross Workman. When was our organ installed, and what company is it from?
Yep. So this original instrument, the original work that we went and looked at behind the screen was installed in 1950, and at that time the control console for the organ was not this console. It was a different console, and it was positioned in the middle of the sanctuary, recessed down into the platform that we're sitting on right now. And in 1998, there was a rebuild in which this console was installed, and then it was put installed in such a way that this console can now move around up here, which just makes it a much more flexible instrument. We can do different things with it depending on what kinds of musical events we're working on in the church.
So the name of the company is Chance?
The company is Chance.
And are they out of the United States?
They're a United States company. I do not remember where they are based. I'm sorry. I think it's Ohio, but I'm not positive about that.
Another question here from Scott Obenberger. How much is this organ currently valued at?
Well, let's start with what it cost to install. In 1950, this was a $50,000 instrument.
$50,000?
$50,000 in 1950. And in 1998, when the console was replaced and a small amount of work done in the pipe case, that refresh or replacement of the console cost over $100,000 in 1998. And the latest appraisal that we have on the instrument puts it at about 1.2 million replacement costs by today's dollars. 1.2 million.
Well, that's quite an asset that we have here.
And I think it's worth noting that the parish has seen fit to install a humidification system that seals that this sanctuary space is a sealed envelope with stable temperature and humidity, and that right there saves so much in maintenance costs. People think of that as being such an expensive investment for a church to undergo, but when you compare it to the cost of the damage to the pipes over the life of living in a space that is not temperature and humidity controlled, it actually you come out ahead by doing that.
And our organ maintenance person would agree fully with you. Prior to having the HVAC system and the humidification system installed in the sanctuary, we were at risk of having pieces of leather on some of the pipes get brittle and
become brittle and break.
Snap.
Right.
We've got a couple more questions that I'd like to get to. Cheryl Sapinski's wondering, what was the purpose of the ribbons on several of those pipes?
Right, so when we went back on the tour, you saw at one point, the camera angle kind of looked up and you saw ribbons wrapping around the pipe. That is simply securing the pipe to the pipe case, to the wall. So instead of affixing the pipes with a metal band, which would then be subject to weather, so think about the temperature changes. As soon as the temperature changes, whatever material the pipes are made out of will either expand or shrink.
I would imagine that metal would also create some sort of vibration and irritating noise.
So if you have a screw or any kind of a mechanism that is attached to the pipe, you risk it vibrating along with the pipe, and you don't actually want to puncture the pipe with a screw.
So we've got a good question here. They are wondering if you are just back in the 1950s with your fashion, or if you're wearing special shoes to accommodate the pedals on the organ. Let's take a look at these shoes if we can.
I don't even think these were fashionable in the 1950s. These are referred to as organ shoes, and anyone who wears them suffers a life of being teased for wearing them. But basically what they are
Mr. Tim, can we get a close-up of this organ shoe?
They are made out of a material that's quite close to, think of a dance, like a dance shoe, a shoe that a dancer would wear.
I don't have my phone on. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, so the upper part of the shoe is kind of a soft, pliable leather. The bottom is also soft leather. You wouldn't want to wear these outside because they would wear through very quickly. And then the heel is tall enough so that it's possible to turn your foot sideways and play the interval of a third on the pedals. Actually, it doesn't work when your foot's not in the shoe. I'll do it with my foot. So I can play toes or heels like that. Or, this is a little too loud, let's do this. There. If I turn my foot sideways, I can play the interval of a third. So if you know what that means, like I'm playing a C and an E at the same time, and the D is coming up in between the heel and the front of my foot.
So one thing that all of us have experienced at one time or another in our life is attending a traditional worship service where the organist maybe isn't quite as seasoned as you are. Can you just give us an example of what it would sound like playing your pedals on a hymn tune, a nice legato hymn tune, if you're only using your toes and not using the heels.
Right. So I'll use that same hymn tune that I played earlier, Holy God, we praise your name. Actually, you know what would be a better one? Would be All Creatures to Our God and King.
While you're finding that, listen to how there's no legato in the bass line and how everything just feels really choppy and disconnected.
So you want just the pedals,
No, go ahead and play the
whole
four-part
thing.
texture.
but all toes?
Yeah.
Here, let's go.
And now, let's go back and have you play it with good pedal technique.
It's hard. So what he's asking me to do...
I would have been more than happy to demonstrate the wrong way to do it. Let's hear the right way.
So by using a mixture of both the toe and the heel, I can then smooth out the line in the pedal so that you don't hear that same choppiness.
That's really nice. While we've got the hymnal open, we've got another question here. When you play hymns at church, does your left hand play the bass line, or do you relegate that to the pedal?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let's look at a hymn like Holy, Holy, Holy. And can we look at that?
Yeah, let's take a look at
Sure.
it.
So in a standard hymnal, we have 4 voices. The soprano and alto are in the treble clef, and the tenor and the bass occupy the bass clef line. In organ playing, the typical position is for the organist's right hand to play the alto and the soprano notes from the treble clef, but then the bass clef gets split up between the left hand and the feet, and the tenor line is played by the left hand, and the bass line is played by the feet. So we could watch that too.
Yeah,
if
let's
you
do
want.
it.
Okay, so here is just a line of only the soprano and alto. And just the tenor. Or soprano, alto, and tenor together. And then bass by itself. And then soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. So now the tenor's in my left hand, the bass are in my feet, and the soprano and alto are in my right hand.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We've got time for just a few more questions, and then we'll have a closing piece of your choice.
Sure.
And the next question that we have is our organ rare, or are there others like it in Milwaukee?
So that question could be answered a couple of ways. When we say rare, do we mean
Unique.
Is there another instrument that is identical to this instrument, or is there another instrument by this maker with this configuration of sounds? The answer to the first question is yes. The answer to the second question is no.
The other thing I'd like to interject is that even if we had this exact same instrument, but we placed it in another sanctuary, the sound of the instrument would be radically different because the acoustics of the space in which the pipes resonate have a tremendous impact on the overall sound.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's one reason that we have hardwood and tile in the sanctuary rather than a lot of carpet.
And the wood ceiling also makes a wonderful addition to warming up the sound as well. So the hard ceiling and this wonderful wood floor up here helps the instrument sound better.
You may have answered this already, but Philip Starr is wondering how many ranks our organ has and how many pipes.
There are about 2,500 pipes, and ranks, what is that number? It's in the high 40s, I think. Remember that some stops have one rank of pipes, but some stops have more than one rank of pipes, up to 3 or 4. So are we up to 56? We might be 56 ranks, but we only have 40-some stops.
All right. And why are our pipes behind a curtain rather than out in the open? That's a great question.
That is an aesthetic choice.
And a monetary one.
Is it?
Part of the reason our pipes are hidden is because it costs more to have them arranged in a beautiful fashion. The way we have them arranged in the back is spatially economical, but it isn't necessarily aesthetically pleasing. So if we were to try to bring a few of the ranks out here, we could do that, but it would be an expense.
And it also really starts to change the character of how the pipes are designed to sound in concert with one another. So you saw, we took the walk from section to section of the organ in the pipe chest. All the pipes within those particular pipe chests are designed to speak in concert with one another. And so as soon as we start to remove those pipes and place them in a different location in the room, that changes the sound of the instrument.
Warren is wondering if you have a favorite stop or combination of stops on the organ. Do you want to just point out maybe a couple of the timbres?
Yeah, there's a couple timbres that I really like. I think this is a lovely flute. This holds gedeckt. So on the tour, we went in back, and I pointed to the wood pipes, the wood pipes that were in the choir section. That's what this one sounds like. I like it. It's a soft kind of sound, but related to it, the choir is capable of doing a lot of sounds that will hold on just a second. I can't talk and find my music at the same time.
While you're opening that, I just want to ask another question from Dick and Loretto Steinmetz. Why do you have strings and bows on the pipes? I guess we covered that already. I'm sorry.
Right.
But they also were wondering, would you mind playing something on the swell and also showing what these pedals, these huge pedals down at the bottom.
So when we were in the swell case, we talked about how the instrument was it's not capable of crescendoing, but because of those swell shades, you can create the illusion of crescendo. So why don't I turn on almost all of the stops on the swell.
Go ahead, David. Pull all the stops.
All the stops on the swell. So that's the swell box open. Now, this is controlling the amount of those louvered shades that open. So when I put the pedal all the way forward like this, the shades are all the way open. And when I put the pedal down like this, the shades have closed all the way.
I remember those shades. Those are the things I almost got my fingers.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
And so let's play just one chord. Whoops, that's the wrong keyboard. Here it is, the swell. So that's the sound of the swell with the box completely closed. And here I will open it gradually. And close it. So it's not a super dramatic sound, but it is a little bit of an effect. This instrument, because it comes out of an American classic organ building tradition as well as a more romantic organ building tradition, actually has two divisions that are enclosed, the swell division as well as the choir division. And so we have two different divisions that can be enclosed. Actually, the echo division is enclosed as well up in the balcony. And so that's what those big pedals are down there.
And I see that we've got a few more buttons on here,
right,
as well as
these large buttons here are referred to as toe studs, and all of those are part of an innovation in the early part of the 20th century to help automate the instrument in a way that the organist was better able to control a large number of stops at one time. So historically, that was done through an electropneumatic system with air tubes, and air tubes were connected behind each one of the stops, and you could assign certain combinations of stops to certain memory buttons, and so then you'd press a memory button, and you'd see the stops, show us the stops. You could see the stops move depending on what memory button you were pushing. Nowadays, instead of an electropneumatic mechanism, it's a digital all-state system, and so we actually have a computerized all-state digital circuitry and 99 levels of memory where I can set up to 33 different settings times 99, all programmed into the memory ahead of time.
Well, fantastic. Thanks for sharing all of this information with the congregation and me. Our hour is coming to an end. Is there something you'd like to play for us to close our time together?
Yeah, if you'll all listen to one more thing, I would like to play for you a selection that I referred to earlier by Nigel Ogden called The New Era. So I should say, in selecting this, I purposefully planned out the sounds that I was going to be using to maximize the widest number of possible sounds. And so as this piece unfolds, you'll start to hear all the different colors and character of sound that the instrument is capable of. Are you gonna show all over? Okay, so hold on here. Get myself set up. All right.
sharing your talents and your knowledge with us tonight. I want to invite everybody who's at home listening to join us again next Wednesday night when we'll be offering a Community Sings event.
So if you have ideas for hymns that you'd like to sing, you should submit those ideas to us, either through the text message that you've been sending tonight or to Neil directly. And we'll put together a packet of information for you so that you can participate in the hymn sing from your own home.
And before we sign off, I just want to give a shout out to our sound tech and video engineer, Mr. Timothy Karth. Thank you very much, Tim. We appreciate everything you've been doing for the church. We'll see you next Wednesday. Bye.
Bye, everybody.